In this video, I'm going to be talking you through one of the major assignments for this course, the case study assignment. The goal of this assignment is to provide you with an opportunity to apply your learning about second language acquisition theory and research to a real-life language learner and a real-life language learning context. The case study is going to be conducted in two parts, so I'll talk through what those two parts are and what to expect for each of those sections. All right, so in part one, you're going to be focusing on a language learner. So for this part, you need to choose a focal language learner. This could be a multilingual learner who's learning in a K-12 environment, or it could be a student who's a world language learner, either at any K-12 stage or at the university level. So the goal is that it's somebody who is learning a new language. I do recommend for those of you who are practicing teachers or studying education to become teachers that you choose a multilingual learner if you can, because it's helpful to choose a student or perhaps a future student who represents some of the students that you work with or the students that you might work with. But it's also fine if you can't get into a classroom or if you prefer to look at a world language context to find someone at the university level. So once you've identified your focal language learner, then you're going to create an instrument for gathering information about them and about their language learning experiences, needs, and goals. You can do this in the form of an interview. So you could develop an interview protocol with a series of questions to get at that information. You could create a questionnaire or a survey or some combination of these. But the ultimate goal is that you come away with some information about who your learner is and about their language learning experiences, needs, and goals. You then schedule a time to meet with that focal student and use the instrument to gather information about the learner. If you're able, I encourage you to use an audio recorder so that you can transcribe some direct student speech, which will help strengthen your paper. And then from there, you will write up your results, connecting your analysis and implications to SLA theories and concepts. If you can't get an audio recorder, or even if you can, I do recommend taking notes as you're talking with the learner so you can capture some of that direct speech. So let's take a look at what the paper should look like. So these are the components that I want to see in your case study paper. First, an introduction, briefly introduce the focal learner and the learning context, so their language learning context. And then you're going to briefly discuss your data collection methods. So what did you do? What tools did you design? How did you actually gather this information? And then the actual instrument that you designed should be included in the appendix with any evidence you collected. Then you will go into your language analysis, which is kind of the bulk of the paper, where you analyze what you learned about language acquisition from your focal learner. You should give specific examples and quotes to support your analysis and tie what you learned back to the SLA theories and concepts that we're learning in class. After that, you have an implication section where you consider what you learned throughout the data collection and analysis, and then make some recommendations that you could give to the focal learner's teacher or professor to help support the student's language development. So here I want to see some specific examples, and also you can make some connections back to SLA theories or other things we've learned in the course about effective practice for supporting language learners. You'll end with a conclusion, and then you'll have your references section in APA format for anything that was cited, and then your appendix where you have the data collection instrument that you developed, and then any evidence you collected. So if you transcribed the interview responses, you could include those. If you gave a survey, include the completed survey to show the data that you used. There's no page limit for this, but the final report should be at least 3 to 5 pages double-spaced, not including the references and appendix section. All right, so that is part one. So that's your opportunity to learn about a language learner in more depth. Part two is focused on the language learning context. So in this part of the case study, you're going to be observing a focal language learner, ideally the same learner that you focused on for case study one, part one, although I understand if that's not possible, it's okay for it to be a different learning context. And you're going to observe that learner for an entire class period. So if that's a K-12 classroom, or if it's an elementary classroom, it might be for the duration of one subject area. If it's a high school classroom, it might be one period, or a university classroom, one class. So an entire class period. And the goal of this is really to gain a better understanding of how language is being used in that classroom, and also how the classroom environment is shaping the students' opportunities to meaningfully use and engage with the language. For this part of the case study, I've developed an observation protocol for you to use so you can track what the learner is doing and the focal student's language use, and also think about the different opportunities that the student has to engage with the new language. So it helps kind of keep your observations organized as you watch. So this is what it looks like. And you can download this as a Word document. So you'll see just kind of the top part includes some basic information about the observation and who the learner is and the learning space. And then there's some reflection questions that I want you to do after you do the observation. But here below, you see kind of these three main components that you'll be using as you observe. So time. I recommend that you try to make a new observational note every 3 to 5 minutes, so you can kind of keep track of what time it is and how time is being used in the lesson, what the learner is doing. So here you might address, what is the activity that they're engaged in? How are students grouped right now? Is it a teacher-led activity or discussion? Or are they working in pairs or working independently? What is the specific task they're working on? What's the content that they're learning? So that's all, what is the learner doing? And then we move into and also in this component, you see language use here, how the teacher is structuring opportunities for language use. And then here you have the focal student's language use itself. So you might note what language is the learner using. Is that student translanguaging? Are they drawing upon their home language as well as their L1 as they're engaging with their L2? Are they communicating with other people? With whom? And are they speaking? Are they listening? Are they reading or writing? What language domain? And so here you might want to capture some direct samples of speech, what's happening with language. And here too, you could say the teacher says this, to kind of like noting what's happening in the classroom. So the goal here is just to capture as much information as you can about the space that's being created for language learning. Or not, right? The things that might be limiting the learner's opportunity to engage with language, if that's the case. Again, although it could be more difficult than with part one, if you're able, I do encourage you to use an audio recorder so you can transcribe some direct speech. You could ask the teacher or the professor if they don't mind if you record, and you could explain the purpose is just a classroom paper. You're not using this data for anything else. And if not, if you can't use an audio recorder, that's okay. I just recommend as you're observing and listening, try to capture as much direct speech as you can, because that will help enhance your analysis. So once you have completed the observation and filled out the protocol, then you begin writing your paper. So the case study paper should have these components. You begin with an introduction, where again, you introduce us to the focal learner and the learning context, and then you engage in your analysis. So analyzing what you learned about language acquisition from your analysis of the language learning context. Again, give specific examples and quotes to support your analysis and tie your learning back to specific theories and concepts. After that, you then move into another recommendation section, but here you're identifying strengths, weaknesses, and recommendations. So considering what you learned, saying what are some of the strengths of this language learning environment, what are some of the weaknesses, areas where you think it could be improved, and then what are the recommendations you would then give to this focal learner's teacher or professor to enhance that environment to better support students' language development with specific examples. And with a brief conclusion, and then your references in appendix. And in the appendix or appendices include the completed protocol. And then if there's any other relevant evidence that you gathered, like if you took pictures of the learning space or pictures of student work that you want to include as evidence, that can be included in the appendix as well. That's optional, but definitely include the completed observation protocol. Again, no page limit on the paper, but the final report should be at least 3 to 5 pages, double-spaced, not including your references and anything in the appendix. So that is the case study. I hope you enjoy this assignment. It is a great opportunity to begin to actually put into practice some of these theories that you're learning about and SLA research that you've been engaging with. And I look forward to seeing what you learn from the case study.